welcome to the Future of Field Service podcast. I'm your host, Sarah Nicastro. Last week, Tom and I started discussing our top 10 favorite podcast moments from 2020. Today, we are going to be continuing where we left off. If you haven't listened to part one of this special episode, you can go back to the website and listen to that now or download it from your favorite podcast platform. Either way, we hope you enjoy the rest of our top 10 favorite moments from the Future of Field Service podcast in 2020. Linda Tucci, who is the Global Senior Director of the Technical Solutions Center at Ortho Clinical Diagnostics. We had Linda on episode 83 talking about the importance of a focus on mental health in service leadership. So let's listen to what Linda has to say.
You know, there can be this stigma around being vulnerable at work, and particularly as a leader, right? And I think that, you know, that stigma is only really going to be minimized or erased by, you know, folks like you leading by example, being comfortable talking about your current reality, and also, you know, showing that despite what was going on in your life and despite the state you were in, you know, mentally and how you might have needed to interact and engage differently, you were still showing up. You know, you were still showing up. You still found ways to contribute and to be effective and impactful. It just looked different than it had before, right? Yeah. So how would you kind of summarize why vulnerability is so important in leadership, particularly this year?
Mm-hmm. Well, you've touched upon it already. You know, just look around, right? All the data says that depression, suicide, anxiety rates are up. And it's unfortunate, even with my own team, there's been family members who have committed suicide. You know, people are suffering. 2020 is throwing the kitchen sink at us. You know, between the lockdowns, job loss, wildfires, hurricanes, stress, polarization, right? And, you know, I would say that we have to ask ourselves, how do we manage? How do we lead in these times? You know, if we want to be experienced as leaders, we have to demonstrate both empathy and compassion. You know, people connect with people. And being vulnerable is not a weakness, it's an act of courage. You know, there's evidence that leaders who are prepared to show their vulnerability more easily gain the trust of others and are believed to be more effective leaders. And I believe in that statement. You know, Brene Brown says endearing greatly that vulnerability is the core, the heart, the center of human experience. And I believe in that.
So when I was making this list of moments, this was like a non-negotiable moment for me to include, because I just think it's so important. I have so much respect for Linda, and I'm so grateful that she was willing to get personal and be vulnerable on this episode. When her and I connected and, you know, talked about some of these things, you know, I said, would you be okay discussing this on a podcast? Like, are you willing to kind of go here? And she's like, absolutely. And I loved that because I think that, you know, mental health is something that I'm passionate about, you know, normalizing and having more discussions about. And, you know, this year in particular, this topic has just been so critical. I mean, you know, we're all having a human experience, right? And everybody's hard looks different, but this year has been hard for everyone. And it's been especially hard for Linda. And rather than, you know, letting that get the best of her or running from it or, you know, shutting down emotionally and trying to put on a stoic face at work, you know, she's led through it all with great vulnerability. And she's done so in a way that has, you know, really empowered her team to be able to speak up and to share what they need and to help each other through a crazy year like this year. And, you know, I will say that this isn't, you know, this was the only podcast we did this year on this topic. It is not the only conversation I had with a service leader on, you know, vulnerability and mental health and the human experience. And, you know, I had a lot of conversations this year about how, you know, we've all got to know each other differently than we ever had before because we need each other more, right? We've had to come together, and leaders are supporting their employees differently. Leaders are supporting each other differently. You know, we're all kind of in it together, right? And I think that the point Linda makes about having the courage to be vulnerable is just such an important point.
Yeah. I love when we have the opportunity to have conversations that are, about broader organizational behavior rather than sort of the, not that I don't love our conversations about maximizing margins, but being able to take that, and look at it from a culture perspective as well. I think that's such a key component of running an effective business. And the vulnerability thing, I think that it's so easy for a leader if a leader is shut off, that sort of creates a ripple effect of paranoia that runs all the way through an organization. If your boss can't show that they're a human being, you're going to shut that down. And we know what happens when people bottle up those things. Like they're not only is there the potential for it to come out in inappropriate ways or in negative ways, but it has a self-destructive effect internally. On a different podcast recently, someone said that we basically as a human species are all suffering from a collective sense of trauma right now. And we can't even really understand. We can't understand it right now because we're in it still, right? And not being able to address that, but also not being able to address that some days at work are hard, it has a really negative effect. So, and it's not something that, even if you consider yourself a very emotionally open person, I think it's really useful and imperative to reflect on that every so often as well. And think about your relationships in the office and think about the impact that those have. So, such a great conversation. One of the best. I really loved that conversation. Linda is a great speaker.
I agree. And I think that, there's been a lot of good in in a lot of conversations I've had this year. That's been one of the high points, right? So despite all of the challenges and how hard it's been, if you ask people what positive has come from it, that deeper connection is one of the top things that gets mentioned. And I think that it's a good thing to be able to connect differently than we have before, and something that I think will stick with people. I think that's a good point. But Linda did have some really good advice for people in leadership positions that I remember asking her specifically, like, what if this makes somebody really uncomfortable? Like, then what do you tell them to do? Because I could see people thinking like, So that episode is fantastic and well worth a listen. That was episode 83. Number 7 on the list is Reeve Bunn, who is the president of DSL, talking about the pace of change. So let's hear what Reeve has to say.
One of the things you said to me when we spoke last that I really like is you said it's inspiring how fast we can change. And I like that quote for a few different reasons, but tell us what you mean by that. Tell us how you've been able to be agile and nimble and what lessons you've learned as this has unfolded.
Yeah. Well, and your world is pretty comfortable. I would say we've never been a complacent company by any stretch, but you start to think that there's a lot of different things that you can do at any given time. And then you get into early March and all of a sudden, all of the non-necessities go away. Your focus it's laser focused. And so the speed at which you start to do things, it's quite amazing to step back from it and look at it and say, in the normal course of business, what we just did in a week, we probably would have, for a lot of the right reasons, done that over the course of a couple of months, let's say, right? And so all of a sudden, in a way, it reminds you of what you're truly capable of. But I think ultimately, people that are in roles of leadership, you got to take that away as that's kind of the job here going forward, is what are we putting aside and not doing is just as important as what we are doing. Because when we do direct our energies and our efforts behind something, if we truly do it, boy, oh boy, we can do it really well, and we can do it really quickly. Now, what slows us down is the things that we take on the periphery, that stuff around the edge that sometimes internally we call it shiny things, the things that are not necessarily the most important things for the business. They seem kind of neat. They seem like they might be a small win. And before you know it, you're consumed by 15 of those things, and you aren't getting anything truly done, even the stuff that's really, really, really important. So kind of the Stephen Covey motto, first things first. If you focus in, it's amazing what you can do. And I'm sure there are so many organizations that have been reminded of that over the course of the past few months. But that is very inspiring, right? That is an amazing thing to take away from all of this, is the power of the organization to truly move when it sets its mind to it. You can move a mountain pretty fast, way faster than we all probably thought we could have back in January.
All right, Tom, you go first again.
So one thing that I think really stands out here is when he's talking about the shiny things, right? The sort of peripheral things that can preoccupy our time. And I think, frankly, we see a lot of software providers who sell nothing but these shiny things, these elements that are not necessarily, that look good on paper, that are high tech, quote unquote, that contain the appropriate number of buzzwords, but don't dramatically help the current, either your current challenges or more broadly set you up for success. And it's easy to have things like that start to weigh you down. So really interesting perspective. Reeve's story is just really interesting across the board as well. DSL is a different flavor than a lot of the companies that we talk to. But as you said at the top here, hits a lot of the commonalities that we see too.
Yeah. And this was one of my favorite moments. I mean, I could say that about all of these, but I loved when Reeve said he had been inspired by realizing how quickly they could change when they needed to, or put their mind to it. And again, if you look for some of the silver linings, I think that the companies that allowed themselves to be agile and be creative and, work their way through these challenges, they have something to be very proud of. And for me, it was very fulfilling to hear Reeve, have that moment of pride in realizing, what they could accomplish as a company. And it was just really, really cool moment. So that's episode 64. Another one that is well worth the full listen. Number 8 on the list is ANDRITZ on digital transformation. So this is Klaus Glatz, Chief Digital Officer at ANDRITZ, and this is episode 82. And we were talking through some of the lessons learned when it comes to digital transformation. So let's hear what Klaus shares.
All right, so let's talk through a couple of the lessons learned. So the first comment you made is how important it is to think big but act small. So tell folks what you mean by that.
Yes, that's why I said, I guess our vision was and still is, I guess, we want to develop an autonomous whatever. I guess if you start from zero, I guess it's very ambitious saying, I guess at some point in time, I guess all of the things should run autonomous. That's why I guess you need to have a very clear plan, which steps you need to take in order to get there. And we also started very small, very easy, took a very simple product and really started to understand how we need to develop our competences and our skills in order to be able to develop those things. For sure, yes, it's important still. Things like you need a proper budget and you need to have a project sponsor and you need to have also someone who has a vision where I want to develop to. I guess from a product solution perspective, it's easier. From a business model change, it's much more complex. From things like equipment as a service, it's also a different complexity. But we started really with, as said, quick wins, easy things, and started to get all these models what we're developing together. And we also have now today a very strong development team. We also have distributed development with people in India, with people in Croatia, with people in Austria, with people in Finland. And as said, I guess you need to really see to break a big thing into small pieces and then be quick in the delivery. We also now integrate customers in our discussions. So once we're doing a proof of value for something, we typically have already 10, 15 customers willing to test, willing to use it. And we also expand our reach, so to say, or our chain, also including customers. And once we did we had a tool called Spareback Catalog. We had 15 customers, which we used in order to cross-check and to challenge if those things what we think a customer needs is really required or requested by a customer. So I think you need to open up your channels, your partnering, your collaboration, and really understand what are the needs of a customer, what he really needs, and for which parts he's really willing to pay. Because at the end of the day, for sure, also our interest is to increase our revenue side, and that's why I guess it's important not to work 2 years in your protected environment. Go out to the customers, learn, I guess, understand. Failing is also okay. This is also what we need to learn, and it's think big and start small.
So, again, talking about digital transformation, I mean, you're talking about a lot, right? Like it's a lot. Just like the topic of servitization, these are journeys. And I think that, this advice is really good advice. I think the organizations that have success on their digital transformation journeys are those that can strike the right balance between having a big long-term vision, but taking small pragmatic steps towards that vision in a way that makes it far more consumable. And I think that, ANDRITZ has been very successful in their efforts around digital transformation. And I think that this is certainly one of the reasons why, they're, just like he said, taking chunks and focusing on achieving success there and then moving on and building on that success. So I think that, trying not to do too much at once. It also relates back to the conversation around change management. I'll take you way back. Our friend Greg Lush, who was on one of our very early podcasts, he talked about the concept of digital reputation, right? So this idea of, doing these small things one at a time that add up to this big picture, it helps you manage change better. It helps you create a positive digital reputation because you're doing these projects that are successful. And I just think it's really good advice. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, the example that I used in an article a little bit over a year ago now was it's a business school case study from the Harvard Business School that gets bandied around. It's Richcon Steel, and it's a real company that just dumped a bunch of digital services on their employees. half the employees, the systems didn't work properly. The other half just ignored them. So you ended up with all of these redundant systems, and ultimately they ended up losing a huge amount of money because they didn't implement smartly and they didn't implement appropriately. So that step-by-step approach, that's tested, and it really goes back to what Henrietta said, and it goes back to what Reeve said as well, that there needs to be a justification for each move forward, and that needs to happen, and that justification can't exist in a vacuum, though. It can't it can't be a Band-Aid, because that's not an effective way to enable your technology strategy. It needs to look at the moment, and it needs to look at the broader picture of what your technology strategy is and what your DT strategy is, and exist in both of those spaces simultaneously in order to be successful.
Yeah, it's really interesting to hear Klaus articulate, what their vision is, because he's very clear that fully autonomous solutions is where they're going. He has that long-term, it's not just an idea. It's a long-term strategy. But he knows each of the points, it's going to take to ultimately get there. So that's episode 82. Again, well worth a listen. Number 9 is Sonya Lacore, Vice President of In-Flight Operations at Southwest Airlines. That's episode number 80. And Sonya, talks about how Southwest focuses on employees first, period. And it's a good point. So let's hear what Sonya has to say.
I'm curious to ask Sonya, so in your early days at Southwest as a flight attendant, what were some of the ways you saw this employee focus in practice? So how did you recognize firsthand that, at Southwest, the employee is the number one customer?
Well, I think they really demonstrate their investment in you as soon as you walk into the training. They just really, the culture there really is real. It's not a word. It is really real. They grieve with you. They rejoice with you. They celebrate with you. They bring the employee along every step of the journey. And when they say they care about you, I believed it from the beginning because they demonstrated that. Then now, as you become a leader, it is up to you, and it's your obligation to show that to others. And I guess said differently, they take the approach, and I 100% support this. It is really hard to give of yourself if someone is not giving to you. So said differently, it's you got to fill up the employee so they can fill up the customer. Kind of, as we would say in the flight attendant world, put your oxygen mask on first so you can help others. It's kind of that. We put the oxygen mask on our people so that they can be healthy and whole and well to serve the public. And I believed it, and I see it every day today.
So I love this point. So many conversations we have center around the customer experience, right? And as well they should. It only makes sense for companies to be focused on customers and have customers driving, these journeys. But I think this episode is a really good and really important reminder of how intertwined employee engagement is in delivering that customer experience. The oxygen mask analogy is perfect for Southwest. But, the reality is any service business that's looking for its frontline employees to play a part in providing a specific brand experience or looking to differentiate based on service, it's only possible for them to do that if they really believe in what they're doing, if they're really engaged, and if you're, really taking good care of them. I think this episode is a really good reminder that in all of the CX talk, you need to continue thinking about how employee engagement plays a critical role.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And it's so easy to, and I think that there is a predisposition, to focus on customer obsession.
Mm-hmm.
What I think organizations who are looking at it smartly realize that that's not at the expense of their employees.
Mm-hmm.
Customer outlook improves when employees are empowered, when they're compensated appropriately, when they feel that their work is valued, and they value what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, there's obviously a sliding scale that's involved in that. I think within any service function, the key of that is to, and obviously we talk quite a bit about technology, so it's hard not to look at it through that lens.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't totally apply to the Southwest world, but I mean, it does certainly quite a bit, not as much as it would to an industrial manufacturer, though.
Mm-hmm.
Is to let the technology get out of the way so that the employee can do what they do best, which
Right.
is, use their agency, use their personality, use their skill set
Mm-hmm.
to to fulfill the needs of their job. And I think Southwest, at least in the U.S., is a very visible brand and organization. And it's one that many of us interact with, during a normal year,
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit. And it's this is just another conversation that I love. It's so cool to be able to peel back the curtain of a brand that
Mm-hmm.
that you personally interact with. And because of that, it's just it is certainly a great story, and I think it's an important message across all businesses, across all industries.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. All right. Number 10 is Mita Mallick, formerly of Unilever, on diversity and inclusion. So this is episode 68. Mita was formerly the head of diversity and inclusion and cross-cultural marketing at Unilever. And she is now the head of inclusion, equity, and impact at Carta. Mita joined us to talk about diversity, inclusion, as well as having courageous conversations around race. And this is a discussion that I very much enjoyed. So let's hear what Mita has to say.
You're bound to screw it up, right? I mean, it's an area where this is all really heavy, complicated, sticky stuff, right? And so if we want to do better and we want to be catalysts of change and forward motion, it's not going to be a smooth trajectory, right? We're going to screw up as people, and we have to not let that fear prevent us from doing our best. So what practices can businesses put into place to foster more diversity, inclusion, and equity in terms of real action? So, I think any business would say that this is important to them. But if you had to give a few tips on, real tangible action to take to make progress on this within their businesses, what would you suggest?
Lots of tips and advice. I will try to keep it brief. I would say that hire a head of diversity, equity, and inclusion, a chief diversity officer. You need somebody to do this work and lead and strategize. And that person needs to report into the CEO and not 4 levels down or 5 levels down, because that's not where the work gets done, right? Mm-hmm. You need to think about best practices like hiring, starting a diversity and inclusion board. Diversity Best Practices is an amazing organization. They're a diversity think tank, and so much of what I've learned is from them. But there's so much out there in terms of best practices on having an inclusion board, setting targets. What gets measured gets done. Mm-hmm. Thinking about the recruiting pipeline and where you're getting candidates from. Thinking also about, I often get called by smaller companies for advice, and that's a critical moment when you're a smaller startup and you start to think, well, do we all look like and act like each other? And what happens when we start to refer? our friends to come work here. You just sort of perpetuate the issue of not being diverse because you are doing something very well intentioned and tapping into your own networks, but your own networks might actually look like you and act like you.
Right.
So there's so many things that you can be doing to really think about that. And I think, it really starts from the top and your C-suite and your leadership and what's their commitment to this, to having someone run it, to having a team, to having funding. This work certainly isn't free. It's not for the faint-hearted, and it's a lot of work. And so you have to invest in it to show results in return. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, I mean, Mita's point about, you're not going to make progress on something that you're A, not willing to invest in, or B, not willing to measure, are really good points. I think there was a lot of good things in this whole episode. We talked about, how to have difficult conversations on race, both personally and professionally. As you heard me say at the beginning of the clip, these conversations are hard, right? Because you're afraid to say or do the wrong thing unintentionally. And so, I really appreciated Mita allowing me to, ask her anything and talk through it all and give some of her wisdom to our listeners on, how to handle some of these different topics if they're really committed to making positive change. Tom, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm so glad that we're playing a clip from this episode, because this was my, not to choose a favorite, but this was my favorite episode of the year. And I told Mita actually when we finished recording how proud I was to be able to just to amplify her voice. And she's such an empathetic and brilliant and thoughtful speaker. Like, that is a must listen to. Like, the first thing I did after I recorded it was I was like, to my wife, who doesn't listen to every episode, I let her know that she should definitely listen to this one. And I think there's a really interesting point in this clip specifically, which is about diversity. It's about diversity, and I think it's important not to forget that diversity of ideas, that diversity of backgrounds, diversity of of region, the list goes on and on and on. It is so imperative for organizations at every level, organizations, for friend groups. Like, the more perspectives you bring in, the more well-rounded a strategy you can develop,
right,
at any level. And you think about, I live in Boston, where there's a certain degree of startup fatigue that happens here. And I think the sort of the cliched startup culture, it's probably great for like the foosball table industry, but it employs a certain archetypical white male person, because that fits that culture. And that is very limiting. That's very limiting from take your pick in terms of the ways that's limiting, from an idea space, from a voice. It's not the way to run an effective organization. So yeah, fantastic conversation across the board. There's so many interesting topics in there. I could keep talking about it, but this is a long episode already. So I'll stop.
Episode 638. And Tom, to your point, Mita is very, very active on LinkedIn. She does a lot of writing and, posts a lot of really valuable things. So she is worth a follow as well. All right, so that was 10, but I had to put in one bonus episode, and it is our most recent episode, which is Schneider Electric talking about the service inflection point, episode 89. I wanted to add this in just because I think it's a perfect summary point and a positive note to end 2020 on. So this is This is Jerome Saltani, Senior Vice President of U.S. Services, and Alex Gershman, Director of Strategy, Services, and Solutions at Schneider Electric. They were on to not only discuss the company's journey to outcomes-based service, but we also had a conversation about why they're both excited about the inflection point that 2020 has left us at as it relates to service. So let's hear the clip.
With services and the digital piece. And now that we are able to have a much more unified approach in our services portfolio, we believe that we can accelerate very much our approach. And the good news as well is that we see the customer now. It was probably a buzzword a couple of months ago, a couple of years ago. And now it's real. I mean, our customers are asking for that. They are looking for that. So we to answer directly your question, I think we are at an inflection point where we are able, in some cases, some key area, to really deliver the outcome-based services and be able to give this expectation or to provide this expectation to our end user.
Right. I think we're going to look back on 2020 for lots of reasons, but if we think about what's happened in the years before, there have been incremental changes that have happened. Connectivity, customer demand, our own workforces. But given, the intersection of external forces and, acceleration of technology from the customer demand perspective, from the sales perspective, as Jerome mentioned, from the delivery perspective, we're going to look back at 2020 as a massive inflection point across the industry in the way in which services are consumed, delivered, considered, as a whole, and the value that a services organization is going to bring to customers. I fully believe, we'll look back when the white papers are being written, a few years from now. 2020 is going to be that inflection point.
I hope we're not still writing white papers in a couple of years. Just kidding. No, but wonderful point. I mean, this year has been a hard year. And I'm so grateful for this podcast and all of the great conversations we've had. I'm thankful that, it was an opportunity for people to stay connected to one another and to share their experiences. And I do think that, despite the challenges, I think when you look at how this year is impacting opportunity for service, I think we are at an inflection point. I think that there has been, accelerated understanding and acceptance and more openness to change. And, I think that it's going to propel these journeys forward quite a bit in the years to come. So that's a good thing. What do you think, Tom?
Yeah, I agree. I was listening to the radio, and it was NPR, and an analyst was on and indicated that we've sprung ahead by their estimate 10 years in terms of embracing digital transformation over the course of the last 9 months or so. And you can see it in little things. The example they use is, your parents may not have known what a grocery delivery service was capable of doing in February,
right?
But now they use it once a week in order to get groceries. And the thing about digital transformation is that as that adoption rises, service naturally rises alongside it, because as fewer individual touch points through the commerce cycle, exist for any given product, service fills in that gap and creates, that becomes the face of the business. So getting that right is imperative. And, I think we've heard conversations today, and we hear conversations all the time about businesses who are doing that well. That's not to say that businesses aren't going to have to play catch up over the course of the next, I think, again, we're in this right now.
Right.
So we don't know what we don't know. We don't know what tomorrow is going to hold. But the landscape is very different today than it was even 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And that will continue to change in hopefully mostly positive ways. And we will move from a tactical, thinking about this tactically in the trenches, to looking at, okay, what did we do? What have we gone through, and what's next?
Right.
And that I think that point, I am also hopeful that I'm not writing, as someone who has to write a lot of white papers, I hope that I'm not writing any white papers with 2020 in the title ever again after next week. But
Yeah.
but the point is well said, that this is an inflection point.
Absolutely. All right. Well, that's it. That's what we got for you. So I'm super thankful to all of our guests, not just the 12 voices that you heard from today, but everyone that was a part of this podcast in 2020. I'm thankful to our listeners. I appreciate everyone that is taking a listen. And Tom, thank you for all of the hard work you do to make this podcast a reality each and every week, 50 times this year, 50 plus.
Yeah. And thank you, Sarah. This year naturally has not been, it's been full of surprises, but it also has not been the most pleasant, I think, for any of us. And I feel very fortunate to be able to, first of all, work with you every day, because you are a joy to work with.
Thank you.
But also to be able to put together these conversations and share these conversations with people, because in a year that's been full of uncertainty and fear and anxiety, being able to I say come to work as though I'm not just walking downstairs into my home office, but to be able to come to work and hear conversations that are inspiring is so nice. It's really special to be able to do that. And I am pleased and proud of the work that we've done over the course of this year. And I can't wait to start 2021 off with a bang.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you. And thank you everyone for listening. We're wishing you a very happy new year and looking forward to all 2021 has to offer.